Officer, can I start by echoing the comments of both Douglas Ross and Nicola Sturgeon on the ongoing war in Ukraine and send the solidarity of everyone in my party with the people of Ukraine against the tyranny of Vladimir Putin. Presiding Officer, Nicola Sturgeon and I disagree on many things, and it's fair to say we've had our fair share of stoushes over the years, and I'm sure it will have many more in the years to come. But I think it is important to note that she has been at the forefront of Scottish politics for 20 years. She has served in government for 15 years and been First Minister for 8 years. And in that time, she led our country through a global pandemic, a challenge for any leader anywhere in the world. And for that, she deserves our recognition and our respect.
Thank you.
Presiding Officer, the Audit Scotland report.
Can we please give Mr Sarwar the courtesy of listening? Thank you.
Presiding Officer, the Audit Scotland report on NHS published today makes grim reading for the Government. It supports what patients and staff have been saying about waiting times and concludes, before the COVID-19 pandemic, NHS boards were already struggling to meet waiting time standards for planned care, and performance has deteriorated further since. This report confirms that COVID didn't cause the problems, that they were there before COVID, but of course exacerbated by COVID. After nearly 16 years of SNP government, what went wrong?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I thank Anna Sarwar for his generous comments. I fear it might be damning him with faint praise to say he's got more grace in his wee finger than all the Tories combined. Although I'm sure he'll balance it out over the course of these exchanges. And finally, on that point, Presiding Officer, I am definitely showing my age here when I reflect on the fact that one of my earlier election contests was when I stood against Anna Sarwar's father. And my most recent electoral contest, of course, it was against Anna Sarwar himself. And I'm going to spare his blushes by not pointing out the result of the latter one, even though his father beat me fairly and squarely back in the day. Turning to the important matter of the NHS, our NHS does face the most significant challenges that it has at any point in its history. That is largely because of the pandemic, but as I have reflected before, pre the pandemic, there were challenges in our health service, changing demographics, ever-increasing expectations of what health services can deliver. In themselves, positive trends, but ones that nevertheless pose challenges for the health service. What has changed over the years that we have been in government? Well, funding for the National Health Service has doubled. It's higher proportionately than it is in any other part of the UK. Staffing in our health service has increased significantly. We are seeing, and the Auditor General in his report this morning recognises this, we are seeing the signs of reform and innovation so that we can equip our health service to cope with these challenges. So I do not deny the challenges, but what the NHS needs and has is a government that will continue to support it and focus on addressing these challenges. That's the responsibility of government, and that's what I believe the people of Scotland deserve and want to see continue.
Anna Sarwar.
I should say lightly that Nicola Sturgeon does need to remind me of the difference in the 1997 result and the 2021 result. My dad does that often enough for both of us. The truth is this government took its eye off the ball when it came to the NHS, and it didn't prioritise the NHS like it should have done. They weren't prepared and they still haven't caught up. The Health Secretary launched his NHS recovery plan in August 2021, but according to Audit Scotland, current activity is running well below NHS recovery plan targets. More people are being added to waiting lists, are being removed from them, and people are waiting longer for treatment. Performance against cancer waiting time standards is getting worse. Longer waiting times are negatively impacting people's health. And finally, the number of people dying each year is still higher than average. Things are getting worse, not better. The report is damning, and it is clear Humza Yousaf has failed. He published a recovery plan that was more about spin than substance, and as a result, patient outcomes are getting worse, staff are burnt out, and the NHS is going backwards. So does the First Minister finally accept the conclusions in Audit Scotland's report?
First Minister.
I do accept the conclusions in Audit Scotland's report. The challenges on our National Health Service are significant. The recommendations in that report are important, and we will seriously consider each and every single one of them. Staff have been working incredibly hard, and I recognise the description of burnout that many NHS staff will feel. That is why it has been so important to give them the fairest possible pay increase and ensure that, unlike the situation in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, NHS staff have not had to go on strike in Scotland to get that decent pay offer that has now been made. And as an aside on that issue, to bring NHS staff Agenda for Change nurses in England up to the level of those in Scotland, the UK Government would have to offer a 14% pay increase to them. That is the gap that now exists. But in terms of our focus on the National Health Service, we have doubled funding for the National Health Service since coming to office. The budget passed this week in Parliament increases NHS funding by a further £1 billion. Frontline spending in Scotland is 10% higher than in England. We've got more staff. We've got more staff per head of population than in other parts of the UK. And on waiting times, yes, there is much there to do, but we've seen a reduction in the longest waits. We've got a number of national treatment centres opening this year, which will see an additional 12,000 procedures able to be undertaken in the National Health Service. Although cancer waiting times are challenged, as all waiting times are, we're seeing more patients being treated on the key cancer pathways. So much work to do, but a real focus on this government in supporting our National Health Service, because that is our responsibility.
Anna Sarwar.
It's important we look at the facts. The number of people waiting for over a year for inpatient treatment when Humza Yousaf became Health Secretary was 22,000, already too high. According to Audit Scotland, that number now stands over 35,000 people. When he took charge of the NHS, 84.1% of people were seen within the 62-day cancer standard. Now that is just 74.7%. More than 1 in 4 cancer patients are not being seen in time. And the week Humza Yousaf was appointed Health Secretary, 3,448 people waited more than 4 hours in A&E. This week, that number is 7,572. It's more than doubled, even though fewer people are going to A&E. On every single measure, this Health Secretary has failed to get the NHS back on track. In fact, this is the worst it has ever been. So does the First Minister really believe that the man responsible for failing Scotland's NHS should be responsible for our country?
First Minister.
That's a decision for members in my party. But can I say this? Since Humza Yousaf became Health Secretary, and this is what Anna Sarwar never wants to mention, there have been, I think, 3 further waves of a global pandemic that have affected health services all across the UK, Europe and the world. That's not something that can just be ignored. We, in common with other countries, have also just come through one of the most challenging winters that any of us can remember. That's the context for the challenges in our National Health Service, context that is recognised and indeed pointed out by the Audit Scotland report today, which says, and I repeat, the pandemic continues to affect the delivery of NHS services. Scotland's NHS is not alone in facing these issues, and many of the factors are not within the control of the Scottish Government. But we continue to support the NHS in the ways I have set out: record funding, record staffing, record pay rise for Agenda for Change staff, reform and innovation to change how patients go through the National Health Service, and action to reduce waiting times. This is something that is going to take time to properly recover the NHS from the pandemic. That's true in Scotland and in other countries. But the focus of this government will not waver. It never will waver in supporting our National Health Service and all those who depend upon it.